It's the people who are willing and excited to use a growth mindset and try these tools and understand these tools. You don't have to adopt every tool. It's not about being a cyborg using every AI feature, but you have to understand them and then put them to use where it works and not to be more productive. If you're more productive, you're more likely to be hireable, by an employer.
Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're listening. Welcome to AI and the Future of Work, episode 343. I'm your host, Dan Turchin, CEO of PeopleRain, the AI platform for IT and HR employee service. Our community is growing thanks to you, our loyal listeners. As I hope you know by now, we launched a newsletter. Each week, we share additional fun facts, tips, and some clips that don't always make it into the weekly recording. If you're not already subscribed, do it. Join us. There's a link in the show notes. It's hosted on Beehive. We learn weekly from thought leaders on this show. And of course, the added bonus, you get one AI fun fact each week. Today's fun fact from Sam Klebanov at morningbrew.com, who writes about how AI is already shaking up the developer job market. In it, Sam says the overall job market for software engineers has contracted from its high point in 2021 and 2022. 3/4 of developers have used AI to code, and the vast majority say they use it regularly, while 17% rely on it all the time, according to a recent Wired survey. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella said that AI was generating as much as 30% of the company's code. Sundar Pichai from Alphabet said AI is writing over 30% of its code. Mark Zuckerberg from Meta predicted that AI agents would match the abilities of a good mid-level software engineer sometime this year. Experienced software engineers aren't worried about AI automating their jobs, since engineers' work requires creativity and the ability to deeply understand code. Many are optimistic that AI will remove mundane tasks, leaving more time for the things that truly make their work meaningful. Of course, we'll link to the full article in today's show notes. My commentary: AI will partner with humans to automate mundane work for all white-collar roles. It will also augment blue-collar roles to make them safer. Some jobs will be eliminated. If you're in one that's easily automated by a bot, now is a good time to reskill. Many more jobs will be created than lost due to AI in fields like compliance, ethics, managing and maintaining physical robots, and helping humans assimilate new technologies into their lives. To stay ahead, do an honest assessment of your skills, your ambitions, and more important, what you're passionate about. There's always room in the world for creative storytellers and for good humans. Now, shifting to this week's conversation, Kyle Daigle is the COO of developer platform GitHub, which was acquired by Microsoft in 2018. GitHub's the largest source code host with more than 100 million developers and 420 million code repositories. Kyle joined GitHub in 2013, and prior to his current role, he was the VP of Strategy and Chief of Staff to the CEO. Kyle was a partner at Digitalworkbox and VP of Product Development at Geezeo. Kyle frequently speaks on the topic of AI at work and is the face to the world for GitHub Copilot, which launched in 2021 and is arguably the most popular AI app for work, having recently announced 15 million users. Kyle studied at Boston University, go Terriers, and I've been looking forward to this one. Without further ado, Kyle, thanks for hanging out. Welcome to the podcast. Let's start by having you share a bit more about that background and how you got where you are today.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks so much for having me, Dan. I've been super excited about this one. I mean, for me, I think I've always loved, solving problems creatively. And that led me to a kind of two different things. The first is the fine arts, actually, believe it or not. The reason I went to BU was not for computer science. It was for a fine arts degree in lighting design. I really enjoyed doing like a creative task that was deeply technical with a small team of people that required us to be on time. It was the one thing where you couldn't say, oops, we're late, we're going to delay the show another 2 months. That very rarely happened. But at the meantime, I was coding since I was 13, started with working in my town's voter registration office, like going from mainframe data roles to a very mediocre PHP website to allow you to look up if you could vote. And I coded my way through fine arts, essentially, before really falling in love with the idea of, startups and solving problems creatively with a bunch of very ambitious and like-minded people, which got me, of course, to GitHub. So deep down, I'm a developer by trade, though I don't write as much code these days as I used to, and started to chase harder problems, I would say, which is, how do we help all the developers in the world have access to the best tools? The world's code's on GitHub, like you said, but we want to make sure that we're not sort of resting on those laurels, and whether you're an open source or you're using GitHub at work, that you can do your job productively and continue to create and solve meaningful problems, which I think is ultimately what AI is allowing us to do, is solve problems that not that we couldn't have solved before, but weren't really economically viable to solve. It was going to take too much time or too much energy to solve. And that's the other side of my job now as COO of GitHub, is not just helping all the developers in the world, but also ensuring our employees have access to the best tools. And these days, that means some AI tools that help them just take away the pointless part of their job that no one really wants to do. So that way I can let them do what we hired them to do, the thing they're uniquely qualified at, that allows them to kind of be creative. So it's been an interesting journey going from, being a creative to being a developer to becoming a professional developer and doing that for many, many years. And then saying, let's go to the business side of the house and bring the methodology of how we build software to operating a company, and not viewing everything as, software over here and operations over there. We can treat our changes to businesses just like an MVP ship of software. And we've been able to test that out a fair bit with bringing AI to GitHub over the last, 3 or so years.
You've had a remarkable run at GitHub. You joined it when it was a startup, but now you're part of Microsoft and you've changed the world. No over-dramatization. You've changed the world.
It's been hard to consider what honestly comes next because of that. It's like so rare. I remember, I think it was maybe 2016, if I remember correctly, we had a database outage. Like every company that scales has some sort of outage. And, at the time I was super stressed out about getting the website back up and working with my colleagues to fix it. And the thing that I remember thinking after we sort of like figured it out and started to, remediate the issue was it was a snow day for 100 million people around the world. You know what I mean? It was a day where, suddenly GitHub didn't work. And it's so rare to be able to work at something that is like a dial tone in a utility and helps people create. There's definitely much bigger websites in the world than GitHub, and there's a lot of social media properties that have a lot more people and so forth. But I think the thing that has always made it unique for me is we're helping other people do what they want to do and put their ideas into the world via software. And it's been fun to just evolve my own career here, to be honest, and not just to sort of climb just the engineering ladder or just an operations ladder, or communications or marketing or whatever, and being able just to, have some really talented people help us on that big mission that, I think keeps a lot of the GitHub employees here.
What has and hasn't changed about the culture of GitHub in 11 years, 12 years?
Culturally, GitHub has just always been about, bringing people together and sort of being like open and collaborative in a really unique way. Part of it is, I think, from the early days, like the founders and the early employees really operated like an open source project. We talk about remote and async now in the post-COVID era, but like GitHub has been remote essentially from the beginning. The early employees were in San Francisco, but very quickly they were hiring everywhere. And so for GitHub in those days, being remote was also asynchronous. Like you didn't know when I was going to work necessarily. And it was important that I was always preparing you, because the person working on the next piece might be in Australia and I live on the East Coast of the United States. And so we still have that remote culture, like that hasn't changed. We have offices, but broadly speaking, they're for the community. We're kind of dedicating a full floor of San Francisco to letting folks come in and run events in our spaces. And then the second floor is just bringing in hubbers, our employees, for offsites, given we're all over the world. So that has really kind of continued this idea of like, let's just collaborate together around the world. And I will get messages from, just new hubbers, any hubber, and vice versa. Like we always just say, like, just ask. And I think there's just this openness to let's figure it out together, not like, well, you can't ask Kyle. You got to go ask your manager, and that person asks their manager, and that person asks, in kind of either direction. That collaborative spirit has remained the same. I think culturally, in some cases, just from a pure sort of product and business perspective, up until 2018, GitHub was broadly code. It was code review. I had announced actions, I believe, moments before the deal closed, essentially. And then it was a little closer to like an IFTT for developers than it was a CI/CD platform, right? And after the acquisition, we gained access to so many resources and so many also just really smart people at Microsoft that could help us go from, a single focused product that was, best of breed to bringing in a suite of other possibilities that every developer needs to use as part of their day to day. And so why not make it be highly integrated? And so going on that journey to more of a sort of suite product has allowed us to tackle just bigger problems, work with bigger open source projects, be able to have more complex enterprise customers as well, because they all sort of don't want to manage 15 tools. They want to have few and just focus on shipping their software. But that was a shift, right? Like going from sort of crafting, a small handful of things to business lines. I think was probably like the biggest shift for GitHub from as part of that sort of like acquisition flow. But I tell folks all the time, I don't know that things like GitHub Copilot would exist if it weren't for the partnership and being a part of Microsoft. Some very smart people joined GitHub as part of the acquisition of Semel, which became our GitHub Advanced Security product. And those folks and several others, worked on GitHub Copilot thanks to being able to work with OpenAI, and so a lot of things have kind of stayed the same, though they've evolved like literal evolution, working remotely, kind of working like open source projects, et cetera. And then other things have continued to speed up simply because we've been able to take the best parts of what has made Microsoft so successful while remaining an open platform, developers first, and focused on those the people that are actually writing the code, and not just immediately shifting to the people who are buying the tools for the people who write the code. That's remained true since that day.
I gave the 2013 version of Kyle a crystal ball, and I showed you what 2025 would look like. Would you have just fallen out of your chair? Like, what would have surprised you most about what has happened since then?
Yeah. I don't know that I would have believed it. It's a little cliche to say, but I do believe it to be true. In 2013, we were talking about code is craft and all these sorts of truisms of writing software that were very, very popular back then. And I think that's important. I think that's a very key part of what's sort of let software be this interesting and evolving field. However, going from that moment to shipping a feature that powers another feature that powers AI, that powers the ability to do code gen, to really just change the world in not a hyperbolic way but in a real way is wild. We all kind of knew that GitHub was onto something. And so when I joined, it felt a bit more like a social movement than, a change in the, an industrial revolution moment, I guess, but very, very quickly, we've realized that as every company has to write their own software and more companies are choosing to invest in software and not just buy software tooling, we've been able to not just sort of create and start this broad change, but now partner with all the customers and model makers and everyone to like in some ways speed it up. The thing that I think 2013 Kyle would feel that 2025 Kyle does feel is I just care so much about pragmatism. I like him definitely always challenged by incredibly smart people who have visions for the future. And I love like reading them and understanding them and like challenging them and them challenging me. But at the end of the day, I'm remembering sitting down and writing code. And like all the marketing and all the hype in the world is not going to convince me that something is better. It has to actually make my life better. And so whether that be, making pull requests better back then or now, just like using AI in ways that are actually valuable and not just sort of pushing the boundaries. That's an important step. Like we need to continue to do that so we know once we find a boundary, we can kind of land on something that everyone can use. I just never forget that like someone is using this tool. And even with AI, someone is still using this tool, and keeping, that humanity centered is hopefully something that, while maybe I fell off the mark at times, has continued to be true through my career at GitHub.
I love that you brought it back to that. The focus on humans. Somebody is using this code. So along those lines, so you're in a unique position. You travel the world, you meet, a lot of developers. And given it's a self-selecting group, the group that is in audiences that you're presenting to have chosen to embrace GitHub Copilot. But I still got to imagine that there's always a tinge of apprehension in the room. Everyone's thinking about, like the AI fun fact, about, there's more developers, but maybe the pace of growth has slowed. And those are the humans that you're meeting on a daily basis. Read the temperature in those rooms. What is concerning people, and then what's maybe making them feel optimistic about their role in the future?
I think that still, like you said, still learning how to code and still, having that skill set is fundamentally important, because at the end of the day, code is how we express solutions to problems. It's like the last mile of the thing that we're trying to do. And so when I'm in the room and talking to devs, I can kind of just talk to them like I use these tools, like how many times have we all gone into a tool or Copilot agent mode or something and said like, build me an app that X, and suddenly it doesn't work. You know what I mean? It's not that agent mode's bad or not powerful. It's just that that's not the problem. Like if it were, we would have been using English or natural language for software from day one. And we weren't. We were using punch cards. And just like software, at every moment of major change, going from punch cards to assembly to low-level languages to high-level languages, and kind of so on and so forth, like we're evolving our means of expression. And at each change, people got scared. Like now you don't need to understand memory allocation. Is that a bad thing or a good thing? And we argued about that for 8 or so years. And then suddenly everyone's writing Python and nobody cares anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like we move on to the next set of problems. So during that change and looking at the history, like roles change, what our jobs look like change, etc. But when I'm talking to like students, because I think they're the group that are actually most concerned, to be honest, is just like, well, now what? I'm literally getting a computer science degree right now. Again, just like every other change moment, it's the people who are willing and excited to use a growth mindset and try these tools and understand these tools. You don't have to adopt every tool. It's not about being a cyborg using every AI feature, but you have to understand them and then put them to use where it works and not, to be more productive. If you're more productive, you're more likely to be hireable, by an employer. And so while many companies right now are not, they're talking about how they're not hiring X and Y number of software developers or whatever this year, I think that that's a very temporary thing, because what was actually happening behind the scenes is that we need to rationalize like the product roadmaps and the requests against reality. And that is taking longer than we thought, because if you could put into the world a product that was going to change the world, wouldn't you want to do that as quickly as is humanly possible? Absolutely. Everyone would get a huge competitive advantage by being ChatGPT and not tool 3, 4, or 5 that did that same thing. However, you got to define the problem. You got to define the solution set. And that is where I think we still are getting kind of like hung up as an industry, because there's a uneven application of how to use those problem solving skills with AI to then have a stronger, quicker outcome. So I think it's okay to be apprehensive. I think that's a natural human thing. We're going through a moment of change right now. But I do not think the other side of this is suddenly we're going to need less software or less people solving problems. It's just that we now are going from, hand churning butter to having a machine that can make butter for us. And yet, there's not only one butter in the world. You know what I mean? Like there's millions of recipes because we all want to put our touch on the problem. So yes, there's a little bit of apprehension, but what I will say is that more often now we're talking about, is this AI tool actually helping me, or do I have to use it because my boss is making me? And that is moving the conversation towards, pragmatism and practicality. Is this actually helping us, or are we just kind of riding a hype wave that maybe is, coming to crash? And I think there are plenty of tools that are actually helping us. And there's also a lot of parlor tricks that hopefully we're going to move fast with some speed.
Well said. And if I can torture that analogy, it just may be the case that when we can make vastly more quantities of better tasting butter for cheaper, our appetite for new innovative recipes that involve butter may actually increase. That's what history has shown.
100%.
Yeah.
I mean, how many projects I think back to my time writing software for the voter registration systems. Like I said, it was only possible for my town to do that because I was 13. I think I was making $8.75 an hour or something like that. Like I was the world's probably least expensive East Coast developer at that moment in time. Now, what happens when we can solve problems in our communities, in the world, or in my personal life where I can go, oh man, I'm a developer, but I don't have 80 hours to build an app that only I'm going to use. But what if I can do that because the AI tool is allowing me to? Or what if my children, I have 2 boys, like they wanted to build an app. So I sent them to coding school, and I brought them home and showed them what we're doing. Same thing. Like what if we can let folks just be able to write software? Yes, personal computing I think is important, but also to help the world or to solve problems for customers that are always at the bottom of the backlog. That's the thing that's so hard, I think, to talk about because we're so caught up in the productivity improvement for enterprises. But I do think that being able to talk about these sorts of improvements, as well as inviting way more people into the act of software creation from backgrounds that are not software based, will be incredibly important. I'm in Boston this weekend with a dad friend. Our kids are going to a convention together, and he is a nurse, and he's decided to go and become a software developer. And he's going to a code school and he's learning all the AI tools. He was talking to me like, is this like the world's kind of craziest idea to do this right now? And I told him, I said, like, it's a moment of uncertainty, but at the end of the day, you now can bring some on the ground knowledge, human empathy of that field and go work in a company that maybe does medical related software or insurance related software or things that you've done in your life, that you can now marry those 2 experiences together and bring something that a really incredibly talented developer can't. Just because you need to understand the problem space that you're working in. And so like being able to use AI to, yes, make more butter recipes, I want it from the people who really, really know one thing. You know what I mean? Really, really know the best cows or the best salt or the best herbs or whatever. to join us and be able to be a part of this big change, thanks to tools making it less scary, to be blunt, right? To like get started with writing software or needing to read a 600-page red cover book on how to do C, which is how I tried to start, and kind of falling off.
I celebrate your nurse friend's ambition, and that simple short story says why GitHub is so important, because that person would have obviously been intimidated. Someone who, let's say, gets a fine arts degree in lighting design would have been intimidated about being able to be, one of the world's premier software developers, right? That would have just seemed like beyond an unorthodox approach, impossible, right? That's how we change the world, right?
And I totally agree, Dan. And it's so interesting because while we're going on this journey, there was an era in the aughts, I would say, right, where we celebrated a lot the dropouts, the people who gave up on their degree, whether it be computer science or otherwise, and like beat the system and went into software, right? And we've now have this tool that you don't start by talking to, GitHub Copilot or ChatGPT and saying like, I want to become a software developer. How do I start? That's not what we do anymore. We do what people have done for years and said, I want an app that sends me a push notification every time the Red Sox score. That's all I want. And I don't want all the sort of rigmarole of these other apps. And I want you to teach me how to build it, not just build it. That's a huge difference in going from like, I want to go do this thing, tackle this thing. But I do think it is creating a sort of a dissonance in the egos of people like myself, where it's like, well, suddenly if everyone can eventually do what we do or can build an app, then it's an ego question, even more so than it's a technology question. Because I know how I have to go help this AI break down the problem because I've built software for long enough. But that person that's coming in doesn't. They have to learn that, via AI. But now we have the ability, like you said, to bring all these people in. And I do think the industry is trying to figure out like, oh, well, it's only going to be a junior developer that the AI is able to do. I don't think we need to like talk in those terms, I don't think that's the important thing. We don't need to say that you're a junior dev, you're a senior dev or staff. The AI is a staff dev. That's not the point. The question is, can AI help me go from the position I'm at to, or maybe not position, the like, the point on the array or whatever that I'm at, to go up a couple of clicks as quickly as I can and let me solve more interesting problems? Yes. And it's not about toil. It's not as much about access, as it used to be. It's now you got a phone, you can talk to Copilot, and it'll just, okay, there you go. It'll do it. Do it right in the GitHub app. But I think that's opening up a lot of questions around like, logically, I think this is a good thing, but there's an emotional response to, well, does that mean everyone's going to be a software developer? And usually I answer like, no more than everyone who owns a house is an electrician. There's a degree of what I can do, and then there's a degree that I can't. But it's good that anyone can try and learn and not have to start from arrays and matrices and everything else, and start from the problem I want to solve. That's the unique thing that AI is letting, anyone that has an internet connection, to be able to do.
Yeah, really, really well said. I like the analogy about the home ownership and electricians. That one rings true. So it's impossible to not have a discussion about coding and the future of work without talking about how these amazing technologies are built. And the big benefit, the unfair advantage that GitHub has is the data moat. So I mentioned 420 million repos hosted on GitHub, many of which are open source. And, spoiler alert, it's all that data that makes GitHub Copilot so incredibly good. And now it's the AI chat. It's well beyond autocomplete. And that's the reason. So commons problem, right? Every developer that joins GitHub or that signs up for Copilot wants the benefits of this conversational fluency because everyone else has contributed their code, but they fear that the code that they share in an open source repo could be misused, could show up in someone else's code. I know you have to answer this question all the time.
Yeah.
But talk to that developer who's concerned about, wanting the benefits of building on someone else's IP, but they don't want their own IP shared. And that's, that is how AI works. How do you speak to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that first and foremost, like it's every developer, every organization, every software project's choice. You can join in with this. You can share your code publicly. You can keep it private. You can, you have the ability to kind of make that choice from the get-go. I think that, what we've done when this conversation kind of really started, 2-3 years ago, right, is we introduced an internal tool we call Snippy that basically, like, as I'm writing code, if we get back a certain set of characters that matches any code in the public data set, that we won't return it to you. We'll just stop it right there. And for our enterprise customers, that is a requirement to use the tool, like, because we provide various protections to folks just to make them feel safe in using these tools. In that 2 to 3 years, the discussion has evolved so rapidly that it's not as top of mind as I think it was back then. And I think there's kind of 2 reasons to this. Yes, a little bit of like time heals all wounds, i.e. like, as folks get more comfortable with using these tools and understanding how they work under the hood, they're potentially more okay with, asking an AI tool to write code and getting response back. But I think in software, it's actually a bit different than other types of AI. It's not the same as prose and content. There's only so many different ways that I'm going to write a loop in 200 characters. And we've seen lawsuits battled over this as well. It's like, what's the unique piece? And what we started to get feedback from developers on is like, why is Copilot not returning code to me? And we're saying, well, we're stopping it because it matches the public data set, which very few other, I guess I won't say no one because I don't know that for sure, but very, very few other tools are actively doing right now because the zeitgeist has kind of moved on. And then Copilot can't, it's blocking this. This doesn't make any sense to me. And it's because there's only so many different ways to enumerate a particular problem set or algorithm or whatever via code. And Copilot won't match against that sort of public set because of that problem. So I would say yes, being able to use GitHub Copilot to generate code and ensure that your unique IP is protected is usually an encapsulation of your problem solving ability and then how it's expressed in code, and not like broadly speaking the code itself. That's just like the asset, the end, what comes out the end of the line, and that you can decide what to do with, right? Like, you can put it in your private repository. You don't need that to be public, etc. But when it comes to sort of what we're generating from, and the ability for other AI models to use public code in the way that they've decided to. It's enabling, I think, the developer to have a fair bit of that choice. I do think that we're a little over-indexed on the code actually as an industry, and I think that's like the least interesting AI generated or data set to use. I mean, why not, when I'm coding, Copilot knows that I'm a senior developer who has proficiency in Ruby, but that's it. So that way, when it gives me answers when I'm asking questions in a JavaScript project, it's like putting it in terms I understand. And that's data and context you can totally get from GitHub. It's just not defined semantically in the same way that code is, which makes it so easy to train on. And so I think, as time is going to go on and you see, ChatGPT having memory, for example, those sorts of evolutions of AI models is where I think, software developers will see more and more power ultimately, the ability for it to know who I am, what languages I use, how I generally respond and pull requests when I have a question about an issue or a Jira ticket or whatever. That, I think, is where we're headed with, what's coming out of GitHub. More so than the code itself, because we have all that code. There's some other code, like private code, that we're not training on, obviously. And then we're at the age-old AI problem of we run out of data. to make those individual models better. So having context is probably the next frontier for improving software developers' lives, ultimately.
This is really the topic for a whole separate conversation. I hate to cut it short in any way, but I have to ask at least one other follow on, and that's public repos contain a lot of buggy code, bad patterns. People introduce all kinds of weird architecture patterns. How does GitHub think about the problem of auto-completing with buggy code, or recommend? It's certainly something that has given the early code editing tools a black eye, is that they're leading novice developers down really dark alleys because they're using or repurposing bad code.
Yeah, I mean, I usually challenge that it's uniquely leading junior developers or early developers down dark alleys. It's more just like a canonical event, and we're speeding it up. Every time I hear a thing that's around like, well, AI is making like less secure software, when we like study that, it's like never statistically significant. It's just that like, yes, human beings are error prone. That's what makes us so unique and ultimately so valuable. So what I think we need to do to help them out is, again, like, the LLM is an incredibly powerful tool, but it is one tool, and we need to run the code. We need to see it running. We need to scan it for code vulnerabilities while you're running it. We do things like checking when we send back results that you're not gonna, be given back something that's inherently insecure, ultimately. But by looking at the code and running it with you while you're working on it, that gives us so much more information that then we can, with AI, more deterministically say, there is a dark alley here. Not only can I prove it to you, but like, let me explain to you why it should be a different way. And that's in part why agent mode has been so powerful, is like, yes, it can do more than just like, I asked a question, I got a response, but it is telling me piece by piece, and as agent mode realizes it made its own mistakes, why it's a mistake while it's fixing it. So we get this kind of 2-for-1 win where, yes, the code is less buggy or less inherently insecure or whatever, and it's helping the developer understand, to the extent they want to read it, why Copilot is making a different choice, or why it's evolving its own work, simply because it can run it, it can see the console output, it can look at the web page, kind of so on and so forth. So every time we bring a piece of AI to software development, when we apply it to like only one piece of that, we just like highlight the deficiencies of that one piece. We show you like, yes, we all knew writing code wasn't the only important thing, because then every major software project then runs tests and maybe integration tests, and then does security scanning. And so how do we bring more of that into the act of creation and writing code, rather than needing the sort of DevOps or SDLC flow to go like a, conveyor belt, where it's just like piece to piece to piece? It should just happen in line as you're working, and then hopefully, help you understand the choice that you made and the consequences therein, or the choice that the AI model made and the consequences therein, so that you can make less problematic or less buggy code as you're building it, versus down the line.
The thing that's really important that I want the audience to all take in from that answer is that the human is ultimately responsible for not introducing insecure or buggy code. The LLM is not responsible. The human is responsible. And every product, every tech product that you or your sons or my daughters interact with, there's a human behind it that made a decision about how that system was going to interact, how it was going to be a good steward or not of my data. And I firmly on a soapbox, but I firmly believe we need to get very comfortable challenging the developers, the humans behind the code, and not getting comfortable, resting behind that, that wall of the LM.
There was like a little bit of a meme situation a couple of weeks ago, right? Where someone was very proud. They had like vibe coded an app. They weren't a professional software developer. They put it out into the world, and then there was a security vulnerability. And in the comments, I felt like the developers were all chiming in like, well, look, the LLMs are bad. This is why vibe coding is bad. And I really struggled. And I was talking to the team internally because as if none of us have pushed up a token or pushed up a flawed API endpoint or whatever, you know what I mean, and gotten attacked. And if you haven't, then you haven't had the pleasure of having enough attention on your code to not run into that problem. And so, yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you that like the human is the one in charge and ultimately responsible. I totally agree. That's why we called it Copilot, even though like that term has been evolved in so many different ways. We truly meant it when we said that. However, I do think it's a responsibility of tool providers like us to give that sort of power and protection. And like, we should be warning you when you're about to do something that's going to be problematic, and not just be like, well, I mean, you were using the LLM. It's kind of your fault. We need to do more so that way, as we're bringing in more and more people that want to be a software developer or simply just want to build an app, that like we can teach them or protect them by default, or have runtime platforms that make it so that they're not susceptible to those types of errors or security vulnerabilities, rather than having the takeaway being like, well, that's why, it's only professionals. I know a lot of professionals, including, famously Chris Wanstroth shared many, many years ago as a co-founder, dropped the database a couple times, in the early days of GitHub. We all make mistakes. If you're building a developer tools company, you have to help developers be successful, productive, and secure, and not just point to, well, that's why you have really good humans. That is one reason. But we need to help everybody.
I'll let this one go way over time, and I don't think we even touched on one of the topics that we had prepped for. But that's a credit to you. It's a great conversation. Before we can wrap up, one last question before you're getting off the hot seat. So let's say Kyle and Dan are back having a version of this conversation. It's 2035. What's one non-obvious thing that will have changed about the world of the software developer in the next decade?
So I think I guess it's a little bit broader than software development, but I think it's what I think about or dream about or hope for, I guess, is like we are spending too much time and energy sharing information and context with AI. And so the thought of true like ambient AI, AGI personally does not like interest me. Like it'll happen or not, and life will continue, or Skynet will happen. We'll decide, I guess. What's more interesting to me is that like I don't want to tell AI anything that I know. And I want that to be privacy conscious, and I want that to be secure, but I want it to message me when I leave my hotel room, oh, you grab your rain jacket, because it's just raining outside and it knows that I want to wear a rain jacket. You know what I mean? And so in terms of software development, I feel like there's a lot of that too, where right now we're creating prompts, we're doing all these things, using opinionated platforms. And I don't want that. I want the tooling, but not just in software, but ultimately my whole life, to have context around everything I'm doing, so that it can tell me or just do the work for me as Kyle, and not as the way Kyle views himself and tells the AI about himself, and then the AI attempts to probabilistically emulate. The ambient piece, I think, is far more interesting than kind of any of the larger model improvements, or like, are we only going to use natural language discussions? Sure, maybe, probably, but I want it to be me, not what I'm telling it to be, if that makes sense.
I love the vision of ambient AI, but when you come back and we hang out next, we're going to start there, and we're going to talk about how to prepare humans for the implications of AI that is that aware, that intelligent, that ambient, because we also have to have an important conversation about where it's getting its data and how it's using it, and make sure that there's very transparent awareness to the human about how is it that it's so smart.
Absolutely, and I do feel like we're all going to have a little bit of like a middle school moment where we are incredibly unique, and we're also terribly not unique. There's a lot of deep down truths in our, our tribes of people that we hang out with. And that's why ego and yes, talking about humanity is so important, because we're going to be challenged in ways that are not only technology and privacy, to your point, but in, like ethos and ego of just, I guess this is just how I am, versus it, surprising me with a privacy problem because it had access to data that I didn't expect. You know what I mean?
We're way out of time, way over time. But I'd mentioned before we rolled tape that mutual friend Patty Hatter from Opsera, who's actually a great former guest on this podcast, had prepped me a little bit and said how much I would enjoy having this conversation. And this one did not disappoint. I really, please genuinely take me up on the offer. Come hang out again. This was wonderful. Just really enjoyed the conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me and giving me a little bit of extra time. I super appreciate it.
You bet. Well, we're all rooting for you and the GitHub team. Gosh, that is all the time we have for this week on AI and the future of work. As always, I'm your host, Dan Turchin from PeopleRain. And of course, we're back next week with another fascinating guest.